Okay, today we're going to learn about how to solve a triangle that is not a right triangle. We learned how to solve a right triangle, meaning finding all three angles and finding all three sides by using trig ratios. Remember, sine equals opposite over hypotenuse, cosine of an angle equals adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent of an angle is equal to opposite over adjacent. And when you wanted to find the actual angle, you use the inverse of each of those. Okay, so the inverse of the ratio gave you the measure of the angle. So in here, we're going to find out how we can find all of those 6 pieces of a triangle if it's not a right triangle. And we can do that by using what's called the law of sines. To do that, you need to know the length of at least one side and any 2 other parts. So that means you can have a side and 2 angles. You can have 2 sides and an angle. Any of those will work. So you need to know 2 angle measurements and any 1 side length. That could look like this. You can know an angle, another angle next to that, and the side not in between. Or you can know an angle, a side in between, and another angle. Or you can need to know 2 side lengths and a non-included angle, meaning that it would be side, side, and a non-included angle. Okay, so the law of sines, it looks like this. It is the sine of an angle over the side opposite equals the sine of an angle over the side opposite equals the sine of an angle over the side opposite. So I'm going to draw a triangle here. And let me label it so it makes sense with this notation here. Notice all the vertices are labeled with a capital letter. And so the sides opposite those we just name with a lowercase of that angle. So opposite angle A is a lowercase angle A. Opposite angle B is a lowercase angle B. And opposite angle C is a lowercase angle C. So when you're using the law of sines, you don't need all 3 of these ratios. You could get a proportion by just using those 2, or you can cover up this one over here and you have a proportion, or you can cover up the one in the middle and you have a proportion. So it doesn't matter which one you use. You're just going to use 2 of those ratios to get a proportion that you can solve. And we know that we solve proportions by using the cross product property. This here's another way to use the law of sines. It can be, you can derive this from the law of sines. It's just the reciprocal of everything, so it gives you the same answer. So if you accidentally write it this way, you're still going to get the same answer, but this is actually the law of sines here. Okay, let's do some examples. So we are going to solve a triangle using these methods: angle, angle side, and angle side angle. Notice that this side is not in between. So this is a non-included side, meaning it's not in between. So if we look at this, we're given an angle, and here's a side that's not in between those 2 angles. So that's why it's called a non-included side. This one, on the other hand, has a side that's in between. So this is called included. So that side is in between the 2 angles. So if we look at this one, here we have an angle, and the side that's given is in between those 2 angles. So that's called an included angle. I'm sorry, an included side. So this would be an example of angle, side angle. This would be an example of an angle, another angle, and a non-included side. So we're going to do both of these. Don't have a lot of space on here, so I think I'm going to use another sheet of paper to get, actually I'll start in here and then I'll show it to you on another page where I have a little more space. So looking at this, we have angle A that's given to us. We need to know the measure angle B, and we're given the measure angle C. So angle A is 88 degrees, and angle C is 62 degrees. The angle we need to find is angle B. And you can find that using the angle sum theorem. You're just going to take this here, and you're going to say 180 minus 88 minus 62 is going to give us 30 degrees. So this angle right here is 30 degrees. And the directions say to round your answer to the nearest tenth, but we didn't have to for that one. It was a whole number, so that was pretty easy and straightforward. Okay, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to use law signs. And we're always going to use an angle that's given with the side opposite that's given. So we're going to use this. So we're going to use sine of 62 degrees over 23, and then we're going to make a proportion. So the other side is going to be a side of an angle over its opposite side. So let's just go ahead and go with the 30 degrees. So we're going to go with the 30 degrees and the side opposite, which is B. Okay, so sine of 30 degrees over B. And now we're just going to use a cross product property, multiply these, and when I multiply, I get B times the sine of 62 degrees equals 23 times the sine of 30 degrees. And now we can divide both sides by the sine of 62. And that way we get B equals, and we use our calculator. Make sure that you're in degrees. And we are, so we're good. All right, so now I'm going to put all of this in my calculator. So 23 times the sine of 30. And I close that. And now this is going to do order of operations, so it's going to multiply these first and then divide by sine of 62. If you're not sure that's going to happen, you can always put everything in the top in parentheses. So we get 13.02. 13.02. And so we have to find all three sides. We found all three angles. So the sides, I'm going to write down here in this little space, AB is given to us as 23 meters. BC we need to find still. And AC we just found. Okay, so AC is 13. This side over here is 13 meters. Okay, and now we have to find the third side. So for the third side, and I think I'm gonna squeeze this in just a little bit. Okay, so now we need sine, we're gonna again use sine of 62 over 23, but this time I need to find A. And so A is over here. And so I'm going to look at these two. So I have sine of 88 degrees over its opposite side. So this is angle A. I'm going to call this lowercase a. If you don't want to call it lowercase a, you can just call it BC, because that's another way to name that side. And now we're going to cross multiply, and we get A times sine of 62 degrees equals 23 times sine of 88 degrees. And when I divide both sides by sine of 62 degrees, using our calculator again, so we have 23 times sine of 88, and we're going to divide that by, not multiply, divide by sine of 62. And I get 26.0, just make sure I did that right, double check, I feel like. So yes, 26.03, rounding it to the nearest hundred or nearest tenth is going to give us 26 meters. And so our answer is all of this. Now, you really didn't have to list those angles and sides that were given to you. I just like to do that to remind you that when you're solving a triangle, you're finding all 6 pieces. So, all right, let's look at this next one. This next one is angle, side, angle. This is side B, and this is side C. A is already given to us as 17. So I'm going to go ahead and list what we know. So the things that we know is we know that the measure of angle A, don't know that yet, measure of angle B is 94 degrees, and the measure of angle C is 54 degrees. And you can find A very quickly using the angle sum theorem. So go ahead and do that real quick. You should get 32 degrees for that. And I know that you know how to figure that out, so I'm not going to go through that. This is 32 degrees using the angle sum theorem. So that piece we need to know. The other piece that we need to know is AB. And we need to know AC. We already know that BC is equal to 17 inches. Okay, so these are the two that we need to find. So looking at we need the side opposite. Since this doesn't give us a side and this doesn't give us a side, we're going to use this right here. We're going to use sine of 32 over 17. So that one we're going to start with. Sine of 32 degrees divided by 17 equals, and it doesn't matter which you find first. I'm going to go ahead and go with sine of 94 over b. And then we're going to go ahead and cross multiply. And in your calculator, when you divide both sides by sine of 32, I believe you get 32. Let's double check that. 17 sine of 94 divided by sine of 32. And it gives us 32.00. So we're going to just say 32. And B represented the side AC. So we're going to go ahead and put that up here. AC is 32, and don't forget your units. All right, can we use Pythagorean theorem to get the other side? No, because this is not a right triangle. So we need to find the last side, which is C. So we're still going to use the original 32 degrees over 17. So sine of 32 degrees over 17 equals, and this time we're going to have sine of 54 degrees over C. And we're going to solve that. So go ahead and solve that. Pause your video and solve it real quick. And so I end up getting 26 inches, and you should have got the same thing. All right, so that takes care of that example. Let's look at the next one that is called side-side angle. And let's see what that looks like. This one I think we're going to wait and do another day on the next lesson, because there's some, there can be ambiguous answers for this. When you have an obtuse angle, you have to compare the height of the triangle and make sure you actually can get a triangle. So we're going to pause on this one and move to the last part of the notes, which is finding the area of a triangle. And so we can find the area of a triangle when it's not a right triangle and when you're not given the height of it. And so it's going to look like this. This is our formula. And they all pretty much look the same. If you notice that whatever angle you're taking the sine of, it's the product of the other two sides times 1/2. So kind of study that for a minute and notice the similarities between those. Okay, so as I look at this example here, what I need to focus in on is the angle that I'm given the measure for. So since I'm given the measure for this angle, I'm going to have the area is equal to 1/2 A, because this across here is B, right? So I'm going to have A times C times the sine of B. And you really don't need to have that memorized, that formula. Just know it's the sine of this angle, so the sine of 38 degrees. And then over here is 1/2. And it's going to be times this times this. So times 5 times 7. All right, so let's go ahead and calculate this. This gives me 35 divided by 2, or 35 halves. And then if I put this in my calculator, let's see what we get. 35 divided by 2 times the sine of 38 gives me 10.77, and it says to round to the nearest tenth. So our 10.77 is going to give us the area is equal to 10.8. This is in inches, so remember area, the units are squared, and I am expecting to see the right units. Okay? When you do your homework tonight, skip number 8. Reminder, skip number 8 on the homework. All right, good luck and have fun.